We're back with another edition of the Federalist Radio Hour. I'm Emily Jashinsky, culture editor here at The Federalist. As always, you can email the show at radio@thefederalist.com. Follow us on Twitter at FDRLST. Make sure to subscribe wherever you download your podcasts as well. Today, I'm joined by my colleagues, Kylie Zempel, assistant editor at The Federalist, and Christopher Bedford, senior editor at The Federalist, to break down news that broke on Thursday, where President Joe Biden gave a press conference announcing that he believes he's reached a deal, a bipartisan deal, on a skinny infrastructure package that would essentially create a bipartisan coalition, take the price tag down, and then give Democrats an opportunity to pass through the progressive agenda in a second infrastructure bill that would go through reconciliation and wouldn't need any bipartisan support, essentially, given the numbers Democrats have in Congress. Now, they talk a lot about human infrastructure. That's kind of something that would be punted to the reconciliation bill. There's a big difference, of course, between the reconciliation bill and what's actually going to end up in a bill that somebody like Kristen Sinema and Joe Manchin would support. Chris, what do you think of Biden's announcement today? The coalition includes people like Senator Mitt Romney, Senator Joe Manchin. What did you see, and what do you think it means for the bill actually passing?
Well, right now, what's dangerous about that bill is because right now, as kind of described there, it sounds like the classic kind of Republican president move. Like, all right, I won't get what I want this time, but give me what I want later. But the problem is Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi have both said that they're not. Biden said he's not signing, and Pelosi said she's not voting for any infrastructure bill that doesn't come through at the exact same time as a reconciliation bill.
Right.
So Joe Biden wants them both on his desk. So basically, it's like telling Mitt Romney, hey, me and your wife are going to go on a date, but I'm not going to use your credit card. Can you pay me back?
Well, no,
it's exactly right. It is totally, and any Republican who is stupid enough to agree to this, which there are, is agreeing already to fail. And the only reason I think that the Democrats would even really be willing to offer this and not just tie the whole thing together and try to jam it through is, one, they're a little chastised by the election fight defeat, their attempts to take over the elections for a federal level. But two, they've made a lot of policy changes this week, or done a lot of different policy, whether it's Kamala Harris going to the border, Joe Biden saying, I guess we should probably do something about the highest spike in violent crime in recorded American history.
Yeah.
And we'll do this because they probably got back all that internal polling. It's the only thing that makes people change those policy positions. Said, all right, people aren't liking the crime. People aren't liking the fact that we're completely ignoring the crisis at the border. And hey, look, we can beat the heck out of Republicans for this infrastructure bill if the Republicans don't vote for it. So they offer them here this horrific deal. Republicans, if they have any brains or fortitude, which they might not, will completely balk at it. And the bipartisan deal will completely fall apart. And then Democrats can run, hey, you might get shot in the head as you get out of your car if you live in the city, but Republicans won't do infrastructure.
Well, this is the thing, right? Progressives are demanding that sort of marriage of the bills, the marriage that's not actually a marriage, the sort of like, they want this to happen at the same time because they are legitimately right.
So why have two bills?
Well, this is the thing. Yeah, this is they want to have two bills so that you can have Manchin and Sinema say, that they, don't you think that's what it is? You get Manchin and Sinema saying that they supported the bipartisan deal, right?
But they still need them to pass the reconciliation.
Yes.
Which Manchin is already saying he's not going to do.
Right. And I feel like it gives them leverage in the reconciliation bill. But the reason progressives are demanding this happens is it's very similar to the way the Freedom Caucus negotiated, or at least the dynamic between the Freedom Caucus. The dynamic between Justice Democrats and Democratic leadership is not dissimilar entirely from the dynamic between the Freedom Caucus and the Republican establishment not even 10 years ago. What they want to be sure is that Democrats don't say, oh, we promise we'll do your reconciliation bill with the progressive human infrastructure agenda, and then keep kicking the can down the road and find reasons, the congressional calendar being one of them.
Like they would do. Like Republicans would do to conservatives.
Yeah, of course. Healthcare reform, yeah, okay. And so that's why they want to do the bills at the same time. But Kylie, to Chris's point, if they are still trying to get Manchin and Sinema on board the reconciliation bill, what is that going to look like? Do you see a path to Manchin and Sinema supporting human infrastructure, so-called human infrastructure? And when I say that sort of as a joke, but what they mean by that is sort of the social justice priorities, climate policies. They're basically taking the term infrastructure, and this was a meme, and everybody mocked Kirsten Gillibrand for saying infrastructure is X, Y, and Z. Infrastructure is, family policy, blah, blah, blah. That is actually not what they're trying to do in the reconciliation bill. They're basically saying infrastructure stands for Democratic priority.
Right, exactly. It's a list of Democratic wish list items. I think the Manchin's biggest hangup is not necessarily the priorities, but the price tag. So right now, the reconciliation bill, I think they're floating like a $6 trillion figure. I also saw $4 trillion, but $6 trillion. And so, of course, people like Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema are going to balk at that. But I think there's a lot of things in the bill that they would be willing to, if they see that come down marginally, that might be enough to get them on board. They'll drop the $500,000 from the plan for farmers in Iowa to have better charging stations for their Teslas, but they're still going to pass all of their other Democratic, wish list items that deal with upgrading buildings and providing free community college or childcare, things like that are a little bit more progressive versus like ridiculous things relating to broadband or like electric cars that are easier to kind of toss aside, that might be spendier, where they can really knock that price tag down. Because I think that's the hang up for them. It's not the items in the bill, it's the glaring cost of it.
Yeah, and Manchin loves a bribe. And he loves to act Republican when he's near re-election. Mm-hmm. And you know what? Honestly, I like it when he acts Republican when he's near re-election, because if it wasn't for him right now and Sinema, basically, that the GOP would be being bulldozed. It seems like Sinema's got more cojones than some of the GOP members on her willingness to stand up to her caucus.
Yeah, she does.
And stand up to this agenda, because...
Yeah, but I mean, she's doing it for political purposes, right? Because she's
always done it for political purposes.
Right. But I'm saying it's not as though she's sort of bucking the line on something that would be unpopular with her constituents. She needs to sort of be purple.
But before she ran for election, there's all these videos of her at different abortion rallies and this and that.
Absolutely.
Nothing but left-wing stuff. And the whole time, her staff would whisper, "Don't worry, we're in meetings with her. She promised. She's full of it."
Yeah.
Usually, it's just kind of funny. Like the level of the fact, like, everything from the White House being incredibly lazy and not doing anything to actually back the hard work of this election takeover they wanted to do, and now the left was mad about it. It reminded me of being a conservative under Bush and Donald Trump sometimes. Where, like,
under
all right,
Obama.
We need more under the Republicans.
The first term of
especially
Trump,
under Bush.
those first years of Trump, when you have the presidency, the legislative branch.
Yeah. And we need the conservatives needed the bully pulpit, but it was hard to get Donald Trump to focus on what the Republican legislative agenda, and George W. Bush just didn't care. Like the different things that they could have pushed over. Usually you don't have that problem with Democrats. Obama was very good at it. Clinton was very good at it. Joe Biden's not. He didn't do anything for them. And now you've got to have politicians who get elected saying that they're going to do everything that the base wants and then do none of the things that the base wants. It usually is a conservative problem, not a Democratic problem. And then having like a conference that's at each other's throats all the time and attacking each other with ideological purity tests, that's usually a Republican problem, not a Democratic problem. So this is a really interesting reversal.
It is. But Justice Democrats would disagree vehemently that this isn't also a Democratic problem.
Yeah, but they think we're the most racist country in the world. So they're idiots.
Is the thing. But they also think...
Now it is a Democratic problem.
Well, but I guess what they want from the Democratic Party, I would argue, is much more unreasonable than what the mainstream part of the Freedom Caucus wanted from the Republican Party. But the point still stands. You have these anti-establishment factions within Congress, Justice Democrats, Freedom Caucus, which feels very neutered these days anyway. And they have this sort of similar struggle with leadership where they're highly skeptical, and they're correct to say, if you don't tie this reconciliation bill to the bipartisan bill, then we are not going along with it and making that demand. I wonder if the demand will stick. But at the end of the day, the question then becomes, why on earth, as Chris raised in the beginning, and this is well worth conversation at this point, why on earth would any Republican jump onto the bipartisan infrastructure bill when the bipartisan infrastructure bill, passage of the bipartisan bill, is what will also enable passage of the reconciliation bill. If that's the case, do you think this will hurt the bill's chances with Republicans if that Democratic demand for both to be passed at the same time continues to be attached to the first bill?
I mean, how does it benefit Republicans in any way to do that? Because everyone can see who these bipartisan senators are, too. It's not like this is
a clown car.
Yeah, it really is. Like, I mean, what Republican is going to look at that and say, oh, our party couldn't pass this bipartisan bill where Mitt Romney and Susan Collins made it bipartisan?
Well, the obvious counterpoint...
Suburban women?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Well, I was going to say, the obvious counterpoint, though,
Sorry,
is... Mom. The obvious counterpoint is that you're actually getting stuff done, right? So, like, yes, the net benefit of passing the bipartisan bill and meaningfully reforming American infrastructure and revitalizing American infrastructure is not something that should...
We had a bridge collapse in D.C. yesterday, or 2 days ago.
Right, and so they're going to say that's not something that should be sacrificed at the altar of partisanship. But then it does actually become a very, I think, legitimately substantive question about whether the net benefit of passing this bipartisan bill, which I'm sure is larded up with nonsense for special interests, is worth also the reconciliation bill passing.
But you're not...
But
yeah,
make the argument.
Because you're just falling into a Democratic trap. There's no reason to give it to them when they've been when they've already said, how about this? We'll make a trade. You give me this, I give you this, and then I shoot you and take them both. The Republicans say, okay, we'll give you infrastructure reform, and then they just run on it. It doesn't make any sense at all. The Democrats would have to. I mean, I think that there should be a good faith negotiation here. Now, I don't want just partisan problems because we do have infrastructure. Just partisan bickering. We do have infrastructure problems in the country. Federal money could go a long way toward helping that. It was actually federal infrastructure, bridges, tunnels, highways, things like that. And the Democrats blocked the Republicans from being able to do any kind of meaningful infrastructure reform because they didn't want to give Donald Trump a win or a talking point. That's shameful. I don't want Republicans to fall into that same list at all. But I don't. If the Democrats say explicitly, all right, fine, we'll agree to this, but guess what? We're going to backstab you on this deal. Then Republicans are going to have to say, like, you know what? I think my wife will stay in the house with me tonight.
Well, Republicans...
I'm not going on a date with you.
Well, so that's the question that then becomes, how much leverage will Republicans have over the reconciliation bill? And the answer is obviously none.
None.
They will have none.
Unless, like, Sinema and Manchin are like, don't worry, we'll negotiate for you. Which, by the way, would be stupid to agree to.
Yeah, and also, by the way, Nancy Pelosi is going to be wise to that, right? Nancy Pelosi, if they're like making a deal with the devil behind, closed doors.
How powerful are they? Because remember how many times Donald Trump said, and I don't mean to be talking too poorly of the great man himself, but remember how many times he said, "I'm never signing another one of these bills again." And he did.
All the time.
So maybe if Republicans just kind of force their hand, they'll get a skinny infrastructure bill passed, but it's a real risk when the Democrats have openly said, with at least the White House and the Speaker have said, we're not letting this through.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like maybe we could get this passed and then avoid reconciliation. Like, they've made it very clear that they are inextricably tied. This isn't possibly we could get some gains that, people around the country could really benefit from, like a good infrastructure package, and then we can fight the Democrats later. Like, it's a 50-50 split in the Senate. I don't know how you can think that you could come out on top here.
It's like when the burger you want isn't on the a la carte menu. Like, you have to get the burger and fries. Like, you have to get the combo.
That's exactly what this is.
Yeah.
That's a Wisconsin problem.
No, I don't think so. We've got Culver's. You can do whatever you want there.
It is a magical wonderland of beef sticks and cheese curds.
Yes.
How do we always get here?
Because I'm amazed. I thought that sounded disgusting to me. It's wonderful.
Well, at risk of torturing the metaphor, this is the question then, again, we have to return is Republicans, knowing that they will have pretty much zero leverage over the reconciliation bill, because no matter what, that reconciliation bill is necessarily going to include what Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez wants it to, and Ilhan Omar and Rashid Tlaib and everyone else. It's going to include...
But not at the Senate level. But... Here's the thing about the Senate right now is that they can't pass anything.
Yeah, exactly. But so this is the broader point that I was going to make, is that we are at this incredible impasse in the country right now because, well, no, I'm going to say because the left insists on changing the definition of basic terms in order to advance their agenda. And both sides obviously do that. It's one of the most hilarious things with titles of bills.
You're being racist and paternalistic.
I know.
And mansplaining.
You're going to report me to the thought police.
You're literally tossing a football around in an intimidating manner.
Yeah, you better watch out.
I'm being oppressed.
Yeah. But the point is, when you have the left insisting that infrastructure include what they have devised to label human infrastructure, which is essentially literally their plans for a family like welfare state, massive increases in government, whether it's spending or whether it's actually just sort of the sprawling powers of the federal government, having federal government interventions and all of these different things, playing to their special interest, I imagine, on all of these different things. This is their definition of infrastructure. It's climate justice, it's social justice. You can go down the line, and they would defend that. I mean, they wouldn't be like that. Like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez absolutely adamantly believes that, as I'm sure Mazie Hirono does, as I'm sure some of these. And of course, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez.
Just absolutely brilliant people.
Yeah, right.
Just the smartest in the room. Smartest in any room that they're in.
One of the differences between the Justice Democrats and the Freedom Caucus is that the Justice Democrats have been more willing to go along to get along with leadership, much to the chagrin, at least in this era, of the Justice Democrats compared to the sort of heyday of the Freedom Caucus. They have been more willing to go along and get along with leadership in order to have more leverage at the end of the day. And
Pelosi is a more vicious leader than any of the Republican speakers that we've had for quite some time.
But she also shares their priority on cultural issues, whereas Eric Cantor did not. Right. Like, that's the huge difference.
Whatever happened to that guy?
I don't know. I think he's like
he's a very successful lawyer right now at a hedge fund.
Yeah. So anyway, when you have Nancy Pelosi sharing the cultural priorities of the base, it's a different dynamic. But they also, to the chagrin of, I would say, a lot of progressives, you can get into the force of the vote debate, have been more willing to go along than was probably the case with the Freedom Caucus. But so the Senate bill will obviously be different. It won't just be, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's Christmas list. Actually, that's probably xenophobic to say Christmas list in this context. But it will be...
She's Catholic when she wants to be.
Yeah.
She's Catholic enough to attack the bishops, which, actually, I don't really mind.
It'll, obviously, the Senate bill, whatever happens, it's not going to be the complete wish list, but it'll be a lot of it. And so then you're balancing, as a Republican senator, whether you're Mitt Romney or whomever else, you have to say, are these repairs in the skinny bill worth creating a bigger welfare state, worth creating federal overreach into family, worth creating federal overreach in all of these different areas? Because that if you legitimize and enable passage of that skinny bill, you are also legitimizing and enabling passage of the reconciliation bill.
So what happens if Republicans, have enough spines to stand up to the Democrats, not pass the skinny bill, or if Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema come over and they don't pass reconciliation, it all falls flat. What is the alternative now for Republicans going forward for working on infrastructure?
They could pass the skinny bill if they got every Democrat on board with it.
Yeah, but then Republicans can demand that they're not touching the skinny bill, which would then basically take the talking point away from people who want to say they supported a bipartisan infrastructure deal, because Democrats would then just jam it all into the reconciliation bill and try to please Manchin and Sinema and keep them on board with the reconciliation bill, which would mean they would have to ditch some of it. So Republicans shouldn't be supporting this bill.
No, it's a hostage situation now. And the question, the Democrats have made the calculation, as Herman Cain would say, I've done the calculations. And they've decided that they can run against Republicans if they don't take this Faustian deal, and that's what they're putting down. I'm convinced they looked at the exit polls, they looked at the internal polls, said, yes. Oh no, crime bad, border bad, infrastructure good. All right, watch this.
I guess I just don't think there's anything that Democrats can agree on that would keep both wings happy, especially on the House side. I don't think you can keep...
No, they need to pass them both to keep both
Right,
wings happy,
right,
or AOC is going to have an epileptic aneurysm.
I just don't know without passing both. So, like, I don't know if you can actually get Republicans to really, really pass both, if that's what's on the table and rubber meets the road. You probably can, because Republicans are weak in so many situations, but... I don't know if you can do that, but you do need Republicans to do that. But worse for Democrats, I don't know if Republicans torch the two bill dynamic. If they torch that, I don't know if Democrats could find a way to come together on any of this, because the progressives are so insistent on human infrastructure, because they say it's literally an issue of human rights and basic human rights. And you're just not going to be able to do that and keep Manchin, especially Manchin, let alone Manchin and Sinema. I just don't see how that happens.
No, and I mean, the items, it's worth like actually explicitly saying what the items in this like human infrastructure bill are, because like it's not even like, oh, better healthcare. Like it's not even something that is like human needs or something like that. I mean, it's like it's literally $500,000 for putting electric car stations. CNN characterized it as in disadvantaged communities.
Yeah.
Like why do you need chargers, Tesla chargers in disadvantaged communities?
Because
like,
it's good for Tesla.
it is good for Tesla.
If they can get enough subsidies just to sell Teslas
Yeah.
to the people who can't afford Teslas, so there aren't any Tesla stations there.
And don't want Teslas.
No, why would you want a Tesla? That's
That's what I mean.
If you
extremely
live in-
uncool.
Well, it's also not. I've seen like Tesla charging stations in like rural waysides, and it's like it's a terrible way to get around in rural areas unless you're just going in short trips, because you have to recharge the battery.
But like those are the types of human infrastructure, human rights things that we're talking about. We're not talking about better hospitals in disadvantaged communities. We're talking about throwing $500,000 at electric charging stations.
Well, and that's just a drop in the bucket in the federal budget. But
That's so little money.
yeah,
It's cute.
It's adorable. But
But you know what I'm saying.
here's what drives me crazy is that we are now at this impasse, as I said earlier, because
A quagmire.
a quagmire. Because, and I actually really mean this. I'm not somebody that likes to throw blame around in a partisan fashion, but I think when you zoom out to 30,000 feet, if Democrats had not been completely co-opted or at the control and at the whims of people like the Justice Democrats, if they didn't have to answer to the Justice Democrats insane definitions of basic terms like infrastructure, where they're inflating it to include human rights, and just to say that infrastructure is human infrastructure and has to be climate justice and blah, 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 go down the list. If they didn't insist on that, we would actually be able to do what the country needs, which is infrastructure reform. Do Republicans obstruct necessary bills for partisan purposes? Absolutely. Do establishment Democrats do that? All the time. But at the end of the day, this deal would, actual good being done for taxpayers would be much more likely to happen if Democrats were not held hostage by this faction of the cultural left, where Kylie just cited a CNN headline that is super friendly coverage of this notion of what constitutes infrastructure. If that weren't on the table, if the Democratic Party wasn't hostage to that worldview, this would be a totally different conversation.
And this is going to get boring for a second. And I hate to lecture on this kind of stuff, but I was thinking about it a lot earlier today after I heard an advertisement, and yesterday I heard an NPR Massachusetts advertisement where somebody was saying, I know that people have a right to say what they want, but we also have to consider the right of the listener. Do they have to hear that? So I was thinking about how wrong we've gotten on rights,
Right.
And how you read abortion rights everywhere you go. You read the right to not be offended everywhere you go. These human rights that were built into the infrastructure bill, and there was a really important distinction in the West and the United States between the negative and the positive rights, and those things that were in the Bill of Rights were those negative rights where you don't have to take anything. You don't have to pull from someone else in order to have that. You have that intrinsically through nature and nature's God, and it's enshrined there and just defined and then protected by a government you all agree to. We've completely switched that to have the right to health care. You have the right to all these different things. Now,
to tampons, to free tampons.
Free tampons. And it's totally reasonable for a society to have a discussion over whether or not we want to pay to increase healthcare access for our citizens. But to call it a right has become so confusing and so ridiculous. And all these people think that now that they've got the right to this, right to that, right to this. And all of them come back to taking something from someone else and making it your own. Whether it's taking their free speech rights or taking their gun rights or taking anything from the federal government all across. And with that complete lack of understanding, we have gone so far astray. And newspapers don't understand what the heck they're talking about. This right, that right, this right, that right, this right, that right. Give me a break. It's gone too far. It went too far when it happened. The whole idea is bad. And it's very difficult to put that back in the bottle without like an actual plague.
It's also difficult to extricate it from this entire conversation because we're so it's happened to the point where we're like the metaphor of the boiled frog, right?
Yeah.
Where we're not even at the point where, I mean, I guess last summer a lot of people were like losing their heads, like, oh my gosh, the country has, veered out of control, when people had been sort of saying this is happening for years and not being taken seriously by the media. But if you go to that 30,000 foot view, this entire conversation is happening in the context of the cultural left hijacking the media establishment and the political establishment to the point where we're not even questioning this entire reconciliation bill. Democrats are just treating it like, oh yeah, like we need to jam through all of these human infrastructure policies because we have all three branches of government, and the media is not even being like, the framing isn't Democrats are laughably trying to jam in all of these crazy things under the banner of infrastructure. They're just like, yes, human infrastructure.
Right. At that 30,000 foot view, it's like, this is another example of how politics is so downstream from culture, because we couldn't be having a conversation about what does infrastructure mean if we hadn't veered so far just from language in general being accurate. Like you don't start with a misnamed infrastructure bill. You start with, the AP adopting them in there as like an acceptable pronoun use for people.
Rights.
Yeah, exactly.
Or you don't get infrastructure rights out of the blue. I mean, this is a result of, a decade of words being completely misdefined. This is a political result of a cultural phenomenon, not the other way around.
Perfectly said. Chris, what do you think is going to happen with these bills? So if you obviously touch base with people in the Senate all the time, what do you think is going on in offices like Mitt Romney or Rob Portman or Susan Collins? Do you think they are running the sort of cost-benefit analysis right now of supporting one bill that actually would put some money where it needs to go and some repairs where they need to go and some reinvigoration where it needs to go at the cost of expanding federal power so greatly, even though their fingerprints wouldn't technically be on it because they wouldn't vote yes for the reconciliation bill? What do you think is actually happening in the Senate right now? And where do you see it going?
I'm worried actually about this one because while I don't think the left has the votes to pass anything at all, I think Republicans have shown, especially with nominations with people like Deb Haaland and others who've gone through for Interior, just really radical, really awful, really stupid, really wicked people. And Republicans kept on saying, we're just going to pick our fight. We're going to pick our fight. And they want to chalk up some wins. They don't want to do what the Democrats did to Donald Trump. They're afraid of being called not bipartisan. That there is a risk that even though the Democrats don't have the power to do this, Republicans might be dumb enough to give it to them.
Yeah, go ahead, Kylie.
No, I was just going to echo that. I'm concerned about the same thing. I don't trust Republicans at this point to stand up against this.
Good. That could be a Federalist pen. I don't trust Republicans.
I don't trust Republicans.
I'll design it tonight.
No, and the sad thing is that who's hurt by all of this is not the people clamoring for human infrastructure policy priorities.
Right.
Who's hurt by this is just genuinely the sort of American people from a broad perspective, because there are infrastructure. Like to me, it's an illustration of how legislating is now impossible and policymaking making is now impossible outside the executive and the judicial branches, unfortunately, because it's impossible to do this in Congress when we can't agree on basic definitions of things like infrastructures, because the cultural left has hijacked all of our institutions. And that is a really 30,000-foot view. It's not in the weeds of the daily negotiations, but is absolutely the essential framework, I think, to have this conversation. It should be heartening to the far left that gets sort of concerned about what the establishment is doing in the negotiations, because at the end of the day, they're clearly winning the war, even if they're losing some of the battles along the way. But on that optimistic note, should we wrap up, guys?
Let's go grill a steak.
Yes, that's what we'll be doing as Kylie heads back to her homeland. Well, this has been another edition of the Federalist Radio Hour. I'm joined today by my colleagues, Kylie Zempel, assistant editor at the Federalist, and Christopher Bedford, senior editor at the Federalist. I'm Emily Jashinsky, culture editor here at the Federalist. We'll be back soon with more. Until then, be lovers of freedom and anxious for the fray.